Everspace 2 isn't concerned with simulation or realism. It's a colorful, joyful version of the final frontier you might see on a Saturday morning. And yet, it's still a version of space that is mysterious and exciting, with combat as exhilarating as it is beautiful. Developed by Rockfish Games, Everspace 2 is a sequel to 2017's Everspace, a roguelike with exquisite visuals, breakneck combat, and ships that lend themselves to different playstyles. Everspace 2 represents a paradigm shift away from the high-stakes, fast-paced trappings of a roguelike and into a slower, if just as gorgeous, single-player open world. But before we get into that, a few quick disclaimers. Following its successful Kickstarter campaign, Everspace 2 recently released into early access, and as of writing, there are just 2 open star systems, only 8 or so story missions available, and future game updates are expected to wipe save files. So there's still a road ahead before Everspace 2 is fully realized, and everything I say will be based on a sample of about 20 hours. But even within that limited early access scope, Everspace 2 delights, intrigues, and impresses, and knowing my save files will eventually disappear didn't stop me from pouring into exploration, main and side quests, trying out its different ships and fine-tuning them to my liking. Set after the events of the first Everspace, Adam Roslin returns as the main character, or at least an Adam Roslin returns. Adam in the first game is a clone who gains the freedom to live life for himself after curing a terminal genetic disorder. Adam doesn't, however, free himself from his past, and he's once again thrown into an adventure that leaves him somewhere between pirate and vigilante, surrounded by an interstellar Wild West filled with outlaws, avaricious corporations, and ancient mysteries. It's an archetype of space that's somewhat similar to a lot of games like Elite Dangerous or Rebel Galaxy Outlaw, and Everspace 2 shares a slightly similar structure as well. Your jump drive allows travel across solar systems, taking you planet to planet and place to place. Once you've arrived at your destination, you'll want to use your cruise drive to cover distances measuring multiple kilometers. Like the first Everspace, gameplay takes place inside open-ended, box-shaped maps. These maps may be space stations with places to dock and purchase goods, or maybe a cluster of asteroids hiding a group of outlaws. Covering these areas took time in Everspace because all you had was your boost engines. The cruise drive in Everspace 2 makes traveling around larger areas much easier. It also looks really cool, especially when you barrel into enemies, guns blazing. In this way, and many others, Everspace 2 balances its easygoing space fantasy nature with just the right amount of groundedness to keep things tangible, to keep your ship feeling as though it's a machine you're assembling and improving, not just leveling up. You'll have to periodically return to space stations and docks to maintain your ship, whether it's to sell off cargo or make repairs, but it's structured in a way that prioritizes ease. Ships have shields, armor, and then hull points, acting as health. Shields protect against kinetic damage like bullets, armor against energy damage like lasers, and hulls are susceptible to both. Nanobots, as well as other consumables, can repair your hull while you're out and about, but armor, at least early on, can only be repaired and replaced at landing pads. Secondary weapons like rocket launchers work kind of like magazines. An empty rocket launcher can be replaced with a full one, and when you return to a landing pad that offers it, you can refill your empty rocket launcher for further use. So while individual rocket launchers can only carry so many rockets, you can carry multiple rocket launchers, just like you'd carry multiple magazines in any given shooter. These elements and more necessitate space stations without turning them into a hassle, which I really love. Not to mention, all it takes to land is pressing A, no matter what angle or speed your approach vector is. Getting past surface level comparisons and into actual gameplay, Everspace 2 stays on track with its predecessor as a dogfighter, a shmup with a Z-axis. Combat is still fast. You're sidestepping missiles with quick hits from your boosters, using your vertical and horizontal thrusters to dodge enemy fire. But because you're no longer being pursued by angry aliens, you can really slow down and take your time exploring derelict ships and hollowed asteroids, finding loot hidden behind puzzles and secret doors. Compared to the original, Everspace 2's dogfights feel slightly reined in, not necessarily slower, but more under control. This could be because my ships in the original Everspace are almost fully upgraded, making them faster and more maneuverable, but I suspect combat here has a slightly different bite. Fittingly, Everspace 2's selection of ships feel and fly differently, but don't necessarily fill incompatible roles. There are heavy fighters, light fighters, and ships in between, all with the same modules like shield generators and sensors, as well as a substantially deep and versatile level of customization. Ships differ in a variety of ways: health and maneuverability, weapon and consumable slots, secondary abilities, and their powerful ultimate abilities, called an ult. The gunship, for instance, is slow but powerful. Its special ability gives it 4 primary hardpoints rather than 2, as most ships have, which effectively doubles fire rate. 2 beam lasers on smaller fighters become 4 beam lasers on the gunship. Likewise, the gunship's ult is a powerful auto turret, upping its offensive capability and leaning into its strength as a heavily armored attacker. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, the Scout isn't as heavily armored, but is far more maneuverable. The Scout is my favorite ship from the original Everspace, mostly due to its escapability. The Scout's speed made getting out of deadly situations, which could mean the end to an hour-long run, a lot easier. Everspace 2's Scout retains its speed, and its ult, called Shadow Strike, turns the ship invisible, an opportunity to put some space between yourself and the enemy, perhaps to make a few quick repairs. With Everspace 2's genre change, escapability and speed still matter, but become elements based more on player choice than practicality. See, the gunship was in the first Everspace as well, but its slower speed and inability to use a shield made it, at least in my opinion, objectively more difficult to pilot than other ships. In Everspace 2, I don't think I'd say one ship is more difficult to pilot than the other. Instead, the Scout and gunship are just different, and that difference is great. After 20 hours, I don't really know what ship I prefer, but I also don't dislike any ship. It's a fantastic bit of indecisiveness that keeps me engaged with how I want to play and how I want to tweak my ships. Augments allow you to further customize how your ship performs, effectively points you put in different categories that give your ship a variety of buffs. If I'm in the Scout, I'll have my augments in firepower and utility, which increases damage dealt and decreases my device cooldown. If I'm piloting the gunship, I'll keep firepower but swap my other augments over to structure, giving me bonus hull points. Besides augments, you also have devices, utilities that allow your ship to do anything from a massive EMP blast to a super fast 3-second boost. Using that boost with the gunship, as an example, gives it some escapability, and the Scout, with the EMP installed, a way to render overwhelming groups of enemies temporarily harmless. It is a little tedious to actually activate devices, at least with a controller, and the same could be said for your consumables, which range from damage boosters to nanobots. You have to hold B or X and then press one of the directional buttons to activate them, which is tough when you're in the middle of a dogfight because it takes both of your thumbs off of the analog sticks, even if for a few split seconds. It's a slight annoyance to a system that has a lot of potential, especially once you see that even devices have their own secondary abilities that further alter how they behave. Of course, reinforcing all of this is that all modules fit inside all ships. If you purchase and switch to a new ship, your equipment automatically transfers over. If you're switching between ships you already own, you'll have to transfer your modules manually. Thus, while the gunship will always start with more hull points than the Scout, both, to differing degrees, can benefit from the same shield generator. This modular system opens up new ways to experiment with ships and find synergies between your equipment, augments, and devices. Rockfish has described Everspace 2 as a looter shooter in space, a popularized formula that can be tough to get right, if not at least right for me. As you would expect in a looter shooter, leveling up buffs some of your base stats like weapon damage and critical hit chance, while putting resources into perks unlocks and upgrades new abilities like how far out your tractor beam grabs loot or how expensive it is to restock and repair your ship. Loot that you'll equip to your ship, weapons, sensors, shield generators, and the like, spawn at or near your level and come in a few different rarities. Equipment you don't want or need can be broken down and its parts used to upgrade the equipment you would like to keep, meaning an underleveled item can be upgraded in order to extend its shelf life. Definitely not a new concept, but I think Rockfish thus far has done a nice job. Loot comes in at a regular but not overwhelming pace. I've kept lower level items on my ship because they had a nice secondary ability, or because I just hadn't found a better item. Everspace 2 retains the value of loot and the excitement that comes with finding it, as opposed to the cycle of constant turnover some looters fall into, wherein the excitement of loot gets watered down. It's tough to say how this will feel after 40 or 50 hours through a completed version of Everspace 2, and I still have a lot of unanswered questions. Will devices, augments, and perks keep me engaged and thinking about how I want to tweak my ship? Or will I reach a point that those things are neglected because my weapons do enough damage to keep me from needing them at all? The first Everspace isn't just a good dogfighter or a good roguelike, it's also beautifully dynamic. You have different enemy types that require different tactics to defeat, dangerous environmental effects, and all kinds of items from teleporters to shield-breaking missiles, corrosion missiles, cloaking devices, all that take advantage of the game's dynamics and stay useful, not just fun to use. To recreate the accomplishments of Everspace in an open world is, I would imagine, not an easy task. But the good news is, thus far, Everspace 2 has made a hell of a great first impression, and it's got a foundation to be even better than its predecessor.